Multiculturalism refers to a society where diverse religious, ethnic, or cultural groups live side by side, and there is no one dominant culture. And as of 2020, non-Hispanic white Americans are the racial and ethnic majority in America, representing around 60% of the population. These people have their origins from European countries like Germany or England or Scandinavia and Ireland, etc. Next, you have the Latino Americans, who have their origins in South and Latin America, and they're the largest ethnic minority in America, comprising roughly 20% of the population. Next are the Black or African Americans. They make up 14.1% of the population. Asians, who are roughly 6%, and Native Americans, who are roughly 2% of the population. In other words, the United States is a multicultural society, and the reason for this, well, it's 400 years of immigration from different parts of the world. And let's now look at some of the historical background that led to this. In its first 200 years, these immigrants to America came from Western Europe, like Britain or Germany, Ireland, France, Holland, and Scandinavia. They were attracted by the opportunity to escape poverty and unfreedom, and they saw America as a land of opportunity. They were especially drawn to the American West, the territories where millions of immigrants poured into and pushing their settlements westward into Native American territories. The United States is therefore a history full of brutal oppression of non-white people. For example, in 1790, Congress established a Naturalization Act, which stated that only free white persons could become citizens. This made it impossible for Native Americans, black slaves, or any non-white person to get American citizenship. After the Civil War in 1865, slaves were granted citizenship, but Native Americans were not given citizenship until 1924. Fearing the increasing number of Chinese immigrants in the 1800s, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which prohibited immigration from China and Japan. But this raised a problem. The United States were depending on Chinese immigrants to build their railroads and as a source of cheap labor. So clever politicians created a loophole that allowed workers in particular industries to come to the United States from Japan or China. Now, interestingly, Chinese restaurant cooks were also exempt from the Exclusion Act. That's right, Americans had by now developed a strong appetite for Chinese food and were willing to take in cooks, seen as they were also essential workers. With the industrialization of America really picking up speed from 1865 to the 1920s, this ushered in the period of top immigration to the United States. Attracted by a good wage in America's factories, millions of new immigrants set sail to the United States. And in addition to the immigrants from Western Europe, an entirely new type of immigrant started to arrive. These were Southern and Eastern Europeans, Italians, Slavs, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews. Now, being Catholic, Orthodox, or Jewish instead of Protestant like the old immigrants, this made these people subject to all kinds of discrimination and to a very conscious assimilation policy. That is, to make foreigners give up their culture and become quote-unquote American. Schools and workplaces focused on teaching immigrants American values and encouraged them to lose their habits from the old world. These assimilation policies were effective. America soon earned the nickname the melting pot, a metaphor meaning that all strange and foreign cultures melted to form a single American culture. Upon entering the United States, if the customs official had the trouble pronouncing your name, you were given an English-sounding name right there and then. One Jewish man, for example, who could not speak English, accidentally said "schon vergessen," which means "I forget" to the customs officer. And the officer just wrote Sean Ferguson in the man's identification documents. America's black population were often trapped in segregated districts, often working the lowest type of job. Racist policies excluded blacks from taking factory work, and landlords had policies not to rent or sell housing to blacks. And as a consequence, blacks clustered together in black-only neighborhoods. They built their own houses, funded their own churches, funded their own schools, and ran their own businesses. And although racist policies like these are gone, their effects still linger. Many American cities still have predominantly white and black neighborhoods. And this is a consequence of racism in the past, and it still fuels distrust and feelings of being disconnected to this day. As a reaction against the high numbers of immigrants that came to America in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Congress in 1924 passed the Immigration Act, almost closing the doors to the country entirely. This law stopped all immigrants from Asia and severely limited immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. The law did allow some immigrants from Western Europe, since they were considered white and were therefore desirable. The law also created a new agency, the Border Patrol, whose job it was to guard America's border towards Mexico. This started a process of militarization of the US-Mexico border that has in effect continued to this day. In 1965, America opened its doors for Asia. The Immigration and Nationality Act, passed by Congress, removed restrictions on immigrations from the East. This opened up for Chinese, Vietnamese, Singaporean, Hong Kong, Japanese immigrants to come to the United States, and hundreds of thousands came within a short time span, meaning that Asians and Middle Eastern immigrants are actually the newest group of immigrants to the United States.